Welcome to episode 1 of the review with Andrea and
Brittany.
Today, we would like to introduce you to an insightful podcast called Duct Tape. The host is Jake Miller, and he currently serves as a technology integration specialist for a middle school and is a Google Apps for Education trainer. He also hosts educational technology conferences and has a goal to solve problems in the classroom that educators face. Jake provides a platform for educational specialists to share their expertise and provide other educators with valuable information pertaining to the use of technology in our classrooms.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks for that wonderful introduction of Jake Miller as a podcast to view. A common thing we noticed on this podcast was the fact that technology should be used to meet the goals of the lesson and not be the goal itself. The overall essence of this podcast is to solve problems, meet the classroom and educational goals, and address the needs to enhance the students' learning. In our review, we would like to discuss the 2 episodes that we felt were most beneficial to our current classmates and their roles. First, so let's just take a look at episode 47 with Tisha Ponzio that focused on digital portfolios.
Thank you so much, Brittany. After listening to this episode, my first question for you is, how could you implement digital portfolios in your preschool setting, and how could that benefit the students that you work with? I really like how Tisha talks about a resume being a promise and the digital portfolio being the proof. I like the idea of students creating digital portfolios at young ages, which I know is your area of expertise, so that they can identify and reflect on their growth and their success.
Oh, wonderful question, Andrea. Wonderful question. I would like to implement digital portfolios in my school setting, and I think this will be an excellent way to help students better track and understand what's being taught in the classroom. While digital portfolios being an online tool and is being integrated in my classroom, and at the age of my students being 4 or 5-year-olds, I would also need to have my parents involved. My parents and the students will be able to go in and look at their child's work, whether it's emergent writing skills, artwork, math, language, and also audio and voice recordings. And it's basically explaining what they drew and other types of skills that we are teaching in the classroom. And to add, it would also lessen the hassle of collecting the students' paperwork because when it's all digital. I would also like to implement digital portfolios in a way for the purpose of increasing accessibility. And I say that especially due to the whole COVID-19 pandemic, instead of the parents having to come in the classroom and see the collection of their child's work on paper, it could be more flexible and easier for them to go in and review their child's work online at home. I will also implement the digital portfolio for the sake of completing homeschool assignments at home in the comfort of the parents' home. My students will benefit from the digital portfolios because as a teacher, I can give them better feedback and assist them because I'm listening to their responses and their own work if you can get what I'm saying.
Oh, I love what you're saying. And with the whole COVID-19 pandemic, I 100% agree because right now, even in my classroom setting, and I'm sure everyone else's who's currently teaching, we cannot have those parents coming into our classroom and staying 6 feet apart. So having a portfolio that is digital would be very beneficial at this moment. And honestly, I don't have one started this year, but had I heard this podcast and heard about all the benefits of digital portfolios, I would have definitely tried to have implemented this prior. All right, so let's look at another question coming from this same episode. So I first became a teacher when rubrics were a hot topic. How do you feel about Tisha's stance on rubrics teaching students to be average or just how to be compliant? She stated that she felt like she was not setting her students up for success by using the traditional style rubrics that, as educators, we are all accustomed to. Jake also mentioned that he too realized his goal was student compliance when he created those rubrics instead of, maybe having it be more about growth?
Right. I feel that Rubens, I will agree with Tish and Jake, and I feel that Rubens are teaching students to be more average. And I'm saying this coming from the perspective of a student myself and how I complete my work, or just looking at the Rubens that I have for my classes, just to do enough just to meet that proficient level and not even work towards that exemplary level on the Rubens. Also, I feel like Rubens do not allow me to show where I'm at and where I need to be. It is either developing or exemplary. I feel like there's also no room for improvement because I don't know exactly what I was doing and then where I should be. I also agree with Tish about the traditional Rubens not setting students up for success, because it's either you meet the expectations or you don't.
Absolutely. Before we move on to our next question, I would like to bring up something from the podcast. They discussed the topic of single point rubrics. I did a little research on this topic because I'd honestly never heard of them. I think I could really use this tool to help students grow and celebrate their areas of strength while providing that feedback that you also find so important for their improvement. I feel like Jake Miller consistently provides me with resources and tools to enhance my ability to reach students and help them achieve their goals.
Yes, I would like to piggyback off of that as well. I also like the mention of when I heard the podcast and she was talking about single point rubrics, which I never heard of before, but I took interest in learning more about it as well. After doing some additional research on it, I feel like single rubrics should be taken into consideration, not only in the elementary level school setting, but also in my preschool setting in particular. I say this because it's more flexible, and I can also use it in multiple ways. Like as far as displaying a set criteria or a certain domain in the middle column, and then just on the other side, putting the students where they're at, and then on the inside, it will be more of where we want them to go.
And
so like goal set.
Yeah, and it's very age appropriate for your group of students.
Yes, because of the goal setting, and we do more of we assess them, and then we do an activity, we see where they're at, and then we have next steps. So that goal setting, which are evidence, which really drove home, like single point rubrics are awesome, and I would take that into consideration and using that. I mean, I like that. I like that point that they mentioned in that podcast.
All right.
So now let's take a look at another episode. In this episode, Jake Miller hosts Harley Clark, and the discussion focuses on rethinking assessments. If you would like to listen to the whole episode, it is number 44. Andrea, how are you assessing your students' learning while integrating a technology tool in the classroom? In the podcast, Holly talks about finding ways for the students to assess themselves through using the Flipgrid technology by pressing record and providing feedback to students.
Oh, great question. So far, I've been assessing students through Google Classroom assignments. I've used many different Google applications, but honestly, I haven't used any verbal technology tools. I recently started using Flipgrid after hearing about it on an earlier episode. However, unfortunately, I haven't taken my learning or my students' learning to the next level by allowing them to respond. I have found it interesting how much Jake Miller talks about using Seesaw with older students. I, like so many others at my school, voted not to use Seesaw because we felt like the platform was geared toward younger learners. Now I wish I would have chosen this platform simply because students can verbally respond, and most importantly, the tool is built in, which we all know can be extremely helpful. Using an audio video tool would be and could be very useful for students who are only learning remotely. My team and I have often wondered how much parent support has impacted students' level of accomplishment during this COVID-19 pandemic. For instance, I recently had a child begin face-to-face learning, and after only 2 days of having him in the classroom, I was able to identify many areas of concern. Had I been using a digital tool that allowed students to respond verbally, I think I may have been able to identify misconceptions and a lack in student knowledge earlier, because the parents are constantly working with the kids, and had that child been expected to just verbally respond, then I would have been able to find his misconceptions a little earlier.
Oh, and also I would like to add on to that also how Holly mentioned that we should not just use those data as points on a spreadsheet, but through listening to start a student's journey. And that's when you go on to say about verbalizing, so you can better identify those misconceptions and the lack of student knowledge. So just using that tool would be awesome.
Absolutely.
I like that.
And building that oral fluency as well, having students respond orally. We know it's very important to build students' ability to respond orally, which my ability to respond orally has grown in this course through the use of VoiceThread, which is something that I'd never used before.
And I can agree. Oh man, because Jake also said how he started his podcast. He was an expertise on writing down his scripts and writing and reading them to himself, but he wanted to build more of a platform on integrating tools so he could be able to enhance his oral or verbal language. So I thought that was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I also feel that the preschool setting, we can also use this for them as well, because it will build up their vocabulary and their writing too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, and their listening. Yes. Also, after listening to the podcast on rethinking assessment of digital age, I felt to ask you which ISTE standard would you align this podcast with? As educators, we are always looking for ways to align our lessons and teaching content to a standard to better improve and empower our students' learning.
Oh, great question. Yeah, it's very important that we're always, building on the standards. And if I had to choose, I definitely think that this podcast and all the episodes that I've listened to thus far align with the first ITSE standard. Educators continually improve their practice by learning from and with others and exploring proven and promising practices that leverage technology to improve student learning. However, through the process of learning and exploring technology, we naturally would be looking for ways to help students facilitate their own learning and achievement through these technology tools. So every episode has provided me with a new tool, or it has allowed me to view a familiar tool through a different lens and reevaluate its potential in my classroom and in the hands of my students.
Awesome, nice. Well, fellow educators, this is all we have for you today on the review. Please join us next time when we digest another couple's episodes for you.